Hi, we're going to talk today a little bit about selected response assessments, and we'll go through a little bit of additional information that perhaps wasn't in your text, and I'll go through what the assignment expectations are as well. Before we start talking specifically about selected response tests, I want us to take just a moment to think about a couple of very important terms that we need to be familiar with as we start discussing more and more types of assessment. One of them is validity and one of them is reliability. Validity refers to the degree to which a test measures what it's supposed to measure, or the degree to which you as a teacher are assessing the things that you think you're assessing. When we're writing assessments, we want to make sure that we are indeed assessing those concepts that we have taught students and not a variety of other things. An example of this has perhaps happened to you, or perhaps you've done it yourself, where you have your entire test on, say, the Civil War, and then you throw in a couple of fun questions at the end that maybe have nothing at all to do with the Civil War. Maybe they have to do with something that you've learned previously, or maybe they're just sort of, do you remember my dog's name, or what was the score of the Viking-Packers game? If you use those test questions and figure those into your scores, you reduce the validity of the assessment because you are now measuring items that have nothing to do with the actual content of the test. Reliability refers to the consistency of results or the general dependability of the test. A test that produces similar results under similar conditions is said to be reliable. So if you've ever taken or given an exam where there were two forms of the same test, that's what we're talking about here. Were both of those forms the same in terms of difficulty, in the format that they were in the length of the test? Those are the things that we're thinking about when we're talking about reliability. Another area where reliability is very important is in the scoring of exams. This is something referred to as inter-rater reliability, and this is when if two or more teachers scored the same test, would they indeed get the same results? A few years ago at the ASCD conference, Larry Bell provided a speech in which he talked about 16 mistakes that we make as teachers when we are assessing students. I just want to provide the list for you just so that you can think about which of those you maybe are guilty of and which ones you maybe didn't even realize were necessarily a mistake. I won't read through all of these because you're certainly capable of reading them on your own, but I do want to talk about a couple of them and perhaps clarify what they mean. In general, we don't necessarily do a good job of addressing students' test anxiety or providing them with enough clarification just about the test in general, testing vocabulary and procedures. And that can be really destructive for some students because they get caught up in some of the outside factors and then perform poorly on the test, and that doesn't give us the kind of information that we need to know. We also sometimes create tests that are too short, and by that Dr. Bell means if a student only has one question about a particular topic, that doesn't give us a lot of insight into what they know about that particular area. We also seem to, as teachers, find ourselves asking students to contribute answers in their daily work or homework or in discussions that really require very minimal effort from them or minimal words. They'll sometimes give a one-word answer or a quick sentence, and that doesn't always help us understand where they're at to better gauge what their level of understanding is before they actually get to the test. Another important idea that Dr. Bell points out is we very often don't give students a chance to show off any of their higher order thinking skills. We ask questions that really require low-level thinking on their part. And right now we're talking about selected response tests, and these tests are really best for those kind of lower-level thinking skills, but in general, those are the kinds of questions that we ask more of than questions that ask students to really do some critical or high-end thinking. Some additional mistakes that we also make as teachers when we're assessing students are just not finding out what they know in an ongoing way. We've talked a lot about formative assessment in the past, and we don't do enough of that, and that leads to some problems when we get to summative types of tests. We also don't necessarily review test data in ways that help us with our teaching and help students with their learning. We don't necessarily do that well in isolation in our own classrooms, and we also don't do that well with our colleagues or across the grade level or across the school. When we think about selected response tests, we often think about multiple choice tests. We've all taken many of these and have lots of experience with them. Selected response test questions do certainly have their place. Whenever you want to find out whether or not students know something, if they can identify things, list things, name things, recall information, selected response tests are the exact tool to use. They're quick for students to take, they're easy for teachers to grade, and you can find out whether or not they have some of that basic information mastered. Okay, we're going to jump right in now and talk about specific types of selected response tests. We're going to talk about 3 different types: multiple choice tests, matching, and true and false. Some advantages in using selected response tests is that they're quick and easy. If you just want to find out some basic information that your students can recall, this is absolutely the way to go. It's easy for you to score them, it's easy for students to take them, they're quick, you can compare scores easily, and you know that students are going to come across these in the form of standardized testing. However, there are also some disadvantages. Selected response exam questions don't provide you any insight into what the student is thinking. If they get something wrong, you have no idea why they got it wrong. They maybe guessed incorrectly, they maybe didn't read all the answers, they maybe understood part of the concept. You have no way of knowing. There's also only one right answer. So these types of test questions need to only be used when that is the case. There really is only one right answer. Another disadvantage, of course, is some students are really good guessers. And they can guess and get a question right, which really, again, doesn't tell you whether or not they understand the concept. One type of selected response questions is true or false. You've all seen these. The most important thing for you to remember when you're writing true and false is that the entire question needs to be either true or it needs to be false. When you're creating these, try not to take direct quotes or phrases from the textbook, because what inevitably happens is that language sounds different, and often it's kind of a giveaway that that's the right answer. And don't include clues when you're writing the true and false statement that will help students figure it out just logically. Here are 2 examples of a true or false exam question. Read through them both and figure out which one you think is probably the better question. The better question of these 2 is the second one, and that's because there is one focus of the question. The first example up here provides a lot of information, and students can kind of get caught up in the number of things, and they're much more difficult to keep them fully accurate the more ideas that you add. Another type of selected response test questions are matching questions, and these are where you ask students to identify the items from one column with another column. One thing you need to be aware of when creating matching questions is these again cannot assess beyond just students being able to recall facts. Here's an example of a matching question. I'll give you just a moment here to read it. So this is a common type of question. I'm sure you've seen it many times before. How many of you thought this question was fine, you were loving it until you got to the part where it said responses may be used once, more than once, or not at all? If you're a person who liked matching questions, you probably liked them because you were good at that process of elimination. Once you figured out the ones that you for sure knew, you could kind of figure out the others just based on the ones that were left. It's great when you're a student to be able to do that process of elimination to get to the right answer if you're not really sure what they all are. But as a teacher writing the test, we don't want that to happen. We want to know whether or not students really get something. So a couple of guidelines when you are creating matching test questions is be very clear about the directions. Do you want them to draw lines between the matching items or put numbers or letters. Make sure that you're specific about that. Keep the list of matched items to be matched short. It should never be more than 10. And the two columns should always include the same types of items. For instance, if you have dates on one side, they should all be dates. It shouldn't be dates, a couple of countries, a city, and 2 battles. You should have all of the items grouped together. So all of your states should be on the left-hand side, all of your capitals should be on the right-hand side. It's easier for students to process that way. And you should always include more options than are needed and let students use them more than once. This is done so that students can't play that guessing game, that process of elimination. They really do need to know in order to get the right answer. And finally, we get to multiple choice questions. These are by far the most common type of selected response test questions that we see. Multiple choice test questions contain 3 different parts. The first part is the STEM, which is the statement or the question that you want students to think about. Then they contain the right answer, and then there are distractors, and those are those alternative answers that you want students to read through in order to pick out the one right answer. When we're writing multiple choice questions, we need to keep the following things in mind. Keep the wording simple. You're not trying to confuse students before they even get to thinking about what the right answer is. And make sure that you ask full questions or provide full statements in the STEM. Your students can't read your mind. They don't know what you were thinking when you wrote the test question. Try to eliminate clues that give away the answer within the STEM. And we sometimes do that without really realizing it. Make sure that there's only one right answer. Make sure that your distractors aren't indeed partially right. Just make sure there's one right answer. And don't make the right answer really obvious. In ways that we often do this is the right answer is longer or more detailed than the distractors or the answers that are not right. And then if you are going to use words like not or most or least, bold those or make them capital letters. Somehow set those apart so students don't miss those. We want all the distractors to be plausible, so don't have some that are so far out of the realm of possibility that it's clear they don't make any sense. When writing multiple choice questions, you can write them in such a way that they go beyond recall. You can have them looking at some sort of procedural things. They don't have to be just very basic questions. Make sure that, again, all of the distractors are about the same length. If something is really short or really long, it's generally a clue. And you should avoid using the words always or never, because you all know this student, right, who will come up with the one time in the whole world where that isn't going to be the case. So just avoid using those and save yourself some time. So now it's your turn. You get a chance to practice making your own selected response assessment. For this assignment, you will need to create an assessment, and hopefully you can actually create one that you could use with your students that contains at least 5 true or false questions, 1 set of matching questions with about 5 items to be matched, 5 multiple choice questions, and again, this is a guideline. You can have more of them if you're actually creating a test that requires more. You will submit your test to a peer for some peer feedback no later than February 20th, and then you'll take a look at their feedback and make any changes that you would like to make and upload that in Blackboard no later than February 24th. If you refer to the rubric in the syllabus, you'll also see that there's a reflection piece that goes along with this. So just make sure you double check that before you submit your final assignment in Blackboard.